All right, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining number 3 in our FSLogix webinar series. I can't believe we're already at number 3. On this week or this month's webinar, we're going to talk about, I think, a pretty exciting upcoming feature that FSLogix are delivering in their containers capabilities, and that's Cloud Cache, of course. With me today, I have Gabe Knuth. Gabe, you are the technical marketing at FSLogix, is that right?
Yeah, that's good enough. I wear a lot of hats, but product marketing manager is what it says on my business card.
Product marketing manager, that's it. Excellent. All right. So we'll come back to Gabe in just a second. So first of all, I thought it might be a good idea just to recap what the previous 2 decks were about. Let me just move this out of the way. Hopefully you can see. Excellent. Slide 2. Right. So back in August, we introduced you to Humbik, who deployed Profile Container and Office 365 Container in his virtual desktop environment. He had some very specific challenges around end user experience, and his boss or his director, Steve, is very much the type of end user who demands that user experience, who wants his device or his virtual desktop experience to match what his local PC is like. He wants logon speeds and logon times to be consistent. He wants to ensure that his applications look and feel and work just like they do on a physical PC. So Humbik was able to deliver that, and I'm pretty sure Steve must have bought him a beer or 2 afterwards, and Steve was certainly very happy. Last month, we then introduced you to FSLogix masking and Java redirection. So Humbik's mate Matt had some very specific challenges around solving things in his virtual desktop environment around the number of images that he had, application-specific challenges, multiple versions of the JRE. And of course, by that time, Humbik being an FSLogix expert, he was able to assist Matt in solving those challenges. App masking and Java redirection, I think, are pretty cool solutions for solving those application issues, whether it's reducing images or assisting with licensing or security potentially in the types of applications that you might want to access or might want end users to access on in specific scenarios. Maybe it's location, or maybe it's the device type, or whatever it is. An app masking Java version or Java redirection can assist in there. So with this one, then Humbik's now got his next set of challenges. So he solved his user experience challenges in his primary data center, but now he needs to think about deploying that virtual desktop potentially into multiple data centers. And he might be doing that for disaster recovery scenarios. I think in this particular scenario, Humbik even has users who are starting up in another region, and he wants to deliver a virtual desktop that's closer to those users so that they continue to get a good user experience and they're not impacted by potentially latency across those networks. So he's expanding his virtual desktop environment into just more than one region. So it might be active data centers. Now that he's got those data centers up, he might then need to protect them for disaster recovery scenarios. So what happens if that data center goes down? How do I get users to continue working? And then the business is also interested in what public cloud might mean for them in those scenarios. So he's doing an on-premises virtual desktop environment today, but public cloud, say Azure or AWS, is also interesting, maybe for disaster recovery. So maybe I don't, for a DR environment, I don't need something up and running that's I've paid for real estate and kit. I can maybe invest in Azure or AWS to provide a disaster recovery environment that is spun up on the fly. Additionally, he's looking at several use cases for improving performance. That's both in his virtual desktop environment, in that he has up and running at the moment. It's also when he extends that into multiple data centers, how does he ensure that he gets a consistent user experience across his current data center, any other data center that he stands up, and maybe potentially if he looks at Azure and AWS. And then he's also thinking about, how do I then provide or solve these same types of challenges on physical PCs maybe? or they may be offline access with laptops, but it might be always connected desktop PCs. If I've solved the challenge of user experience, ensure that users log on, they get their applications, the same apps that they had last time, their settings follow them, those applications behave and look and feel like they do on a physical PC. That's great for a virtual desktop environment, but in some sense, I still have the same challenges on physical PCs, especially, say, users who move between physical PCs or not as well. So Humbeck is very interested in looking at those container use cases for those types of scenarios as well. So of course we have Gabe on the line with us, and who better than to talk about these, how we might solve these particular challenges that Humbeck has, than Gabe. So Gabe, short intro just before, but I think your name, of course, is pretty well known in the EUC space, and I think you've been with FSLogix for what, maybe 12 months now. So can you maybe just do a quick intro, and I think it's sort of interesting to talk about why you went to FSLogix.
Yeah, you bet. So it's believe it or not, it's only been 6 months since I
6
joined
months.
FSLogix.
Time
Yeah,
flies.
sure does. Started on February 1st, and we've done so much since then. But prior to joining FSLogix, I spent, I think it was 11 years working at brianmadden.com, communicating about all the different products that we thought were interesting across all of desktop virtualization. And that started back in 2006, 7. And at that time, the only two companies that were there were Citrix and Microsoft. And so it grew from 2 different companies to 200 different companies. And it got to the point where I wanted to be able to dig a little bit deeper rather than focusing. Well, it's really hard to focus on any one thing when you've got so many different companies to cover. And so when I decided to leave brianmadden.com, I was looking for a company that had products that I really liked and wanted to, put a lot of effort behind. And FSLogix solves so many problems that have existed for so many years, that the problems that we solve existed back when I was a consultant prior to joining brianmadden.com in 2007. And so the fact that we, when I still had a real job, I call it, with finger quotes. I feel like I haven't worked a day in my life since then. But when we last had that, I had Outlook OST redirection problems, right? Windows search I was turning off. Applications were a pain to manage. And FSLogix today solves all those things. And so when I was talking to them, they were on the short list of companies I wanted to reach out to. And I joined FSLogix because I believe in these products. And when I got to see the roadmap and see what Cloud Cache was about, that made it a no-brainer for me to join.
Yeah, that Outlook offline scenario, I remember talking to someone, I don't know, maybe 2004 about that. So that was the days when we were delivering terminal servers, and well, Microsoft pure terminal server plus potentially Citrix and on top of that as well. But they had on-prem Exchange sitting in their primary data center, but they needed the terminal server out in the branch office closer to where the users were, because I don't know, 15 years ago, Australia being who it is, and we're just having this conversation about internet just before the webinar, is that our internet connections aren't always the greatest. So it's still the same thing. They've got to get the desktop closer to the user, right? And then the question was, okay, well, how do I fix this with Exchange? And back at the time was, well, no, sorry, you can't put an OST file on the network. Microsoft doesn't support it, and unfortunately, there's no other real way to solve that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's just it. Now we can, and that's, and I think I still, every time I see it, and to be honest, I'm in product marketing, right? So it's not like I use our product day in and day out, like the SEs and stuff do, but I have set it up before, and just to see if I could, and this was like day one. I sat down with fslogix.exe, and tried to install it and run it, and lo and behold, it was not too difficult to get started, even for somebody who'd never touched it before. And once I was doing it, I just couldn't believe it. It's just one of those things. We fought it for so long, and now it just works.
Yeah, so that I guess the simplicity you're talking to there, this is what I sort of covered in the first webinar that we did, and this is where I come from, from an outsider's perspective with FSLogix is the simplicity in the architecture, solving this particular challenge with which everyone has experienced, and everyone knows about. It's not just an issue that IT knows about. I think end users know about the problem as well. Being able to solve that in such a simple manner. So at this point, I guess it's kind of maybe a good point to talk about what Cloud Cache is. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to walk through a couple of slides, and for the attendees listening, if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat window. We potentially see how we go. We'll answer them as we go. Otherwise, we do have some time at the end to chat about these. So if we talk about Cloud Cache, we can't not talk about containers, right? Because essentially, Cloud Cache, can you call it a feature of containers? Is it fair to say that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you have to think about containers as you picture how Cloud Cache works. It will be a feature of both of our container products, Profile Container and Office 365 Container.
Okay, so I've got some slides here from you guys, and so what I'll do, I'm going to talk through these in my own words, hopefully. I'll get you to give me a score out of maybe 10. Well,
Do you want me to correct you along the way? I don't want to be the actually guy, but you know.
Give me a score out of 5, make it easy. Because
Okay.
it's late in the day here and even later for you. So what I'll do, I'll talk through these in my words about what Cloud Cache is, and then see if you can fill in any of the blanks or correct me on any details. So yeah, as we're saying, if we talk about Cloud Cache, we can't not talk about containers. So FSLogix containers, Profile Container, Office 365 Container is about capturing essentially the user profile or portions of the user profile, depending on which one we're talking about, encapsulating that in a virtual disk. It sits on the network, and then when a user connects to a desktop or a XenApp server or RDS or a VMware Horizon, whatever it is, that virtual disk is attached to that target machine, and their profile is immediately there with Profile Container. And then if it's Office 365 Container, it's specifically around Outlook Cache Mode, Windows Search, Skype for Business, OneNote, Office activation, and those types of things, so you can work with existing profile management solutions. Now, so the idea then with Cloud Cache, or sorry, without Cloud Cache, is that that container sits on SMB storage somewhere. So what we see a lot of customers doing is they're rolling out Windows Server 2016. They are then looking at simplifying their environments, whether it's in on-prem environments or public cloud, and they're looking at FSLogix to solve those solutions. So this is a basic idea of what Profile Containers is. How's that?
That works. Keep in mind, this is I mean, we're showing it looks like a physical desktop, but this could be VDI, this could be RDSH, this, any kind of desktop.
Yeah, so I guess the key then is FSLogix, I guess, is independent of the broker and also independent of the underlying hypervisor. The two key components there. And the other one for me too is it's also independent, I guess, of the application sitting above it. What we're doing is we're not changing how the application works. The application works exactly the same way as you would expect on a physical PC. So if we think about Cloud Cache, we've got scenarios where we need to maybe solve, I guess maybe we've got multiple storage locations. We want to improve performance, and the way you do that was with a local cache. So the Cloud Cache basically sits in between where my containers are sitting on SMB storage, and the cache is implemented on my virtual desktop or my RDS system. Sound right?
Yeah, and I'll tell you, if you backed up a slide real quick, I can add a little more color to that. So with any kind of redirection technology, right, like what FSLogix is using here, we've got a problem if we lose connection to the remote storage, right? Or if the remote storage goes away, or if we lose connection to the remote storage, that means our users don't have access to the files. And so that's not an FSLogix problem. I mean, it is, but it's actually a problem that affects any type of redirection technology, from UPD to plain old folder redirection.
Yeah, and we did some sessions on this at Synergy over the past couple of years, showing you how you can swamp a file server very quickly if it's not sized correctly. So it's not, when you say remote, it could be in the same data center. It's just you could quite
Mhm.
easily swamp performance on that file server.
So anytime we lose a connection, that impacts the user, and in this case, the users don't have access to their profile anymore, and so that's why we added that local caching element, which you brought up on the next slide, where that local caching component, as we access blocks from the VHD that's in remote storage, and we actually store those accessed blocks, the hot data, in that local cache, and then our Windows and the applications operate out of that local cache if it already exists in there, and if the data it needs doesn't, we go and pull it out of the remote container, at which point it's then lives in the local cache.
So that's a key word there. I think hot blocks. So that means the local cache is only what needs to be accessed. Is that right?
It's only what's been accessed thus far.
Yep.
Uh,
Yes.
So the local cache is configurable to be persistent or non-persistent between sessions. And so in some environments, the best practice might be to leave the cache alone, and in others it might be to throw it away, and then use it, or start from scratch each time. And there's still benefits, and we can get into those in a little while. But there's reason to choose either one. But there's still benefits to throwing it away and rebuilding it as you go.
Yeah. Just trying to get my slide to advance. Okay, so so now that we've got this local cache and sort of fixed performance there, right, or interruptions, solving interruptions and so on, I guess the next point that often comes up is I've got a profile sitting on a file share, whether it's home directories, profiles, user data, it's the same challenge. How do I provide high availability for those profile or those containers if I've got a single file share? Because clustering is difficult. Well, I shouldn't say difficult, but I think clustering sort of introduces a level of complexity in a file server that's just potentially too much of a headache. I've been in IT for so long. I love the idea of just simplifying things and not over engineering it. So Cloud Cache then introduces the ability to then have multiple locations of where the container can be stored. So now that you've got this local cache, you can resync it back to more than one location. How's that sound?
Yeah, that's perfect. And the way this works is, like everything else with FSLogix, we can configure this just with registry entries. There's no centralized, management infrastructure that you have to deploy or anything. And so there's a single registry location that's CCD locations, and in there's just a delimited list of storage locations. The first one on the list becomes the primary. The second one is the next one, and so on. And the primary, it's kind of a loose term. We actually write to all the locations at the same time, and that way that we keep them in sync. And then we read from whichever one is at the top of that list. And if for some reason that's not available, which I think is the next build, if for some reason that's not available, we just automatically move down to the next one on the list, and operate out of there.
Oh, skipped ahead.
And then, well, so then, so if we lose that connection to SMB storage 1, then we'll start operating out of SMB storage 2, and when that connection comes back online, we'll resync that, make sure everything works just fine, or is in sync, and then start using the primary location again.
Yeah, and as I was just talking about with, I guess using this as a high availability scenario, right? I'm assuming that's kind of the primary use case for this is high availability. There's other use cases that we can jump into in a second, but maybe I've got my desktops within a primary data center. I still want to have some sort of high availability for my profiles. Now, I can use this for the profiles or profile container and Office 365 container. And I think what we're seeing more and more is organizations migrating to solutions like OneDrive for Business. Could also be Dropbox, it could be ShareFile, those sorts of things, but enabling, I guess, migrating home directories to things like OneDrive for Business. And then what you can do with Profile Container, Office 365 Container, for example, is I can get rid of redirection, folder redirection to a network location, but instead redirect inside my sync folder. So whether it's OneDrive for Business or say ShareFile like that, I get rid of that folder redirection to the network. I keep my user data inside my container. That user data then synchronized up to whatever enterprise file sync solution that I'm using. So now I've got my profile and my user data. And again, I'm solving the same challenge with high availability for both those scenarios now, or both those components through the same approach. How's that sound?
That sounds good.
Because yeah, I love, you know that I've done with Helga Klein, as I said previously on folder redirection, the performance hit that sort of has on not only file servers but the user experience on the front end. If you can do things, get away from folder redirection to the network, and then solve that challenge, I think in a simple kind of manner. This is the way I kind of see this going.
You might
So
have made my favorite session title ever at a Bri forum, which was I've got 99 problems and folder redirection is every one of them.
every single one of them, yeah. So now I've got 98 problems, and it's something else.
I'll tell you, you're spot on that that the high availability and storage failover is the primary reason for this. And actually, there's some application continuity issues too. I mean, we had customers give us feedback that if OneDrive, if a profile container disconnects or an Office 365 container disconnects, we'll try to reconnect it as fast as we can. And if and in most situations that works okay, but OneDrive is a good example where if it lost the connection for any amount of time, OneDrive would crash. Well, I don't have a crash. It quit working, forcing users to log off and back on again. And so this customer was experiencing lots of lost productivity, and it wasn't FSLogix's fault as much as their storage controller just took too long to fail over, and the connection timed out. And so they wanted something better than, sounds crazy to say, they wanted something better than their expensive high-end storage platform that had a controller that could fail from one array to the other, or DFS, or they wanted something better than what they already had. And so that's where this whole idea came from, of having the local cache and then being able to connect to multiple storage locations.
Yeah, and the point there you've got about OneDrive for Business is things like Outlook, OneDrive for Business. They're not necessarily written to work where they may, underneath them the disk suddenly gets disconnected. They're written to work on a physical PC where you can pretty much guarantee that unless there's a problem with the actual drive itself, that an IO is going to succeed all the time. So once we start splitting this out, enabling it to work in sort of a multi-tier environment where I've got virtual desktops and file servers and whatever else involved in that, you've got to account for these types of scenarios, even if it's within your own data center, right? It's not just things like latency across wide area networks, it's the performance of multiple different components within the same data center that you've delivered this solution in.
Right.
So I guess at this point, if we think about Humbik's use cases, he's got just keeping that user experience working within the data center that he's done, but now he needs to think about multiple data centers, right? So potentially storage location 2 could be across a different data center. So can I use this in an active scenario or a DR scenario where I want to get those profiles into a different data center and fail over to them?
Absolutely. So this is, and I really would call this active, although I'm sure there's some storage person somewhere that would say this isn't really active. But because we're not reading and writing to all the locations at the exact same time, but it's all the data's there. We're writing to all the locations at the same time. Everything's in sync, and we're only reading from one. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to call it active. And I know I'm the marketing guy saying that, but still, I struggled with that for a little bit. And I'm like, no, you know what? This is legitimately active storage redundancy. You're right. It's multiple data centers. And this could be a disaster recovery or a hot site. This could simply be for backups, just to make sure we had our users' profile data in another location.
Yeah.
And so there's lots of different places that we can go with that, then use cases that we can satisfy with by placing this data in different places.
Yeah, backup's actually one I kind of, I guess, forget about every now and then, but that certainly comes up in conversations with customers around, I want to back this up now. What do I do? So this helps them solve that scenario. So that secondary location, they could then back up with whatever tool they've got.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe to a lesser extent, or to some extent, if Humbuck's now looking at doing this on physical PCs, whether it's say a desktop, I think a good scenario here might be a call center, right? I've got multiple PCs, I have different shifts, people log onto those PCs, could even be a factory floor, the same type of scenario where multiple users for a machine, you want them to get to that machine, log on and have all of their stuff, just follow them, whether it's a user installed application like Teams,
Mm-hmm.
Slack or something like that. But I want to take exactly the same approach on a physical PC. Cloud Cache, I guess, would be able to assist in that scenario as well, right?
Yeah, you can actually configure, and if you can take it to the next degree too, and think of it as a laptop user, which is a potentially offline use case. Normally, you wouldn't use profile containers or office containers with a laptop user, just because they need to have access to this data all the time. But if you still wanted to centralize their data and then be able to use that profile information and other delivery scenarios, you could create a local share on the laptop and configure that as a storage location in Cloud Cache, because you're not limited to 2 locations like we have here, and this just shows 2 SMB locations. We're going to support 4 out of the box, and that's just what we'll support. Not you probably could try to do more. There's no theoretical limit, but there is a practical limit to how many locations you can support. So that's why we've
Right.
landed on 4. But so that scenario though is that if we used one of those storage locations as a local share on that laptop, that means that it is in sync with all the other locations at the same time, and so that user has a full copy of their profile with them all the time. And then when they're connected, they are synchronizing that with all the other replicas of that elsewhere. And so if they, for example, run a Windows 10 laptop and they connect to a Windows 10 VDI environment that's the same profile version,
Yep.
they will have the same profile, and it will pull the profile from whatever the most, however you'd have to configure it to pull from the most geographically sensible location. I'm gesturing with my hands as if so, and then and then the other thing here is that we haven't really touched on it yet, is the cloud element of this. And so so far we've been talking about SMB storage, but we can also use native cloud storage to put all these profile containers. And so think about that laptop user. They go on an airplane and they're not connected, they're making changes. When they get back on the ground again, they pull out their hotspot, and as soon as they're connected to the internet, any of the changes they made while they were offline are automatically synced to the online cloud-based version of their container as well, and that way that data is replicated all over the place.
Yeah. So I'm sort of keen to test that one out myself, and I think in this scenario that the challenge I guess that Humbuck has is he's now looking to either it's a DR environment that he wants to deliver into say Azure, for example, or even a separate region that he wants to deliver, rather than go and do a co-location or have a data center that he's got in another region. He says, I've got my primary region, it's on-prem, I'm happy with that. Now I want to extend that into Azure. And then when organizations start to go and think about Azure, there's some components that just have to run on virtual machines, Active Directory, RDS, those types of things. But anything that they can do to avoid a Windows virtual machine and replace it with a cloud native service such as storage, then you can do that. So I've certainly had a couple of conversations with customers just this week around, I want to deliver, I think it's XenApp in Azure. How do we reduce all the extra support components that we need? So, well, look, profile container, we can go ahead and do that. We can put profile container on, today at least, we can put profile container on Azure storage that's presenting SMB. And then in the future, you'll be able to do with Cloud Cache, you'll be able to support native storage. So when I see REST 443, I'm thinking HTTPS
Correct.
directly to a storage location, right?
Yeah. So right now today we support SMB only. Very soon we will be adding support for Azure Page Blobs, and so that's native Page Blob support. And the 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 idea behind that is that right now, if you to create SMB file storage in Azure, you're using Azure Files, which is more expensive than Page Blobs. And so with Page Blob support, we can communicate natively and take advantage of less expensive storage. Uh, However, this less expensive storage charges you for operations. Reads and writes have a charge associated with them. And part of the driver that we've written for this is optimizing the payloads that we read and write, that we use to read and write from the cloud. And so we are building in the most effective, efficient, cost uh, performance model for our Azure Page Blob support. Down the line, we see ourselves also supporting things like AWS S3. We could support secure FTP if we wanted to. It's just we're going to go based on customer feedback.
Wow, secure FTP. Kent, what
Yeah,
about Gopher?
go.
I want
Hey, you know
Gopher,
what?
please.
If you're not the first to say that, everybody that has said it was joking, but so yeah, so that's the important thing to know is that we're optimizing the cloud storage. So it's not, if you already know that you're going to get charged for reads and writes, know that we are aware of that and we've optimized uh, our driver, our native cloud driver to help make that do that in the most cost effective way. For the time being, though, any SMB storage anywhere, be it Azure, be it on-prem, even AWS, any cloud, as long as you can get SMB storage out of it, we can put profile containers or Office 365 containers there.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, and been working with a number of customers, I guess, for the past couple of years now, who are doing profile container, Office 365 container in primarily Azure, is what I see most. I think it's fair to say most of them are doing it with a virtual machine that's running, say, Windows Server as a file server on Azure. But we do have a number of customers who are using SMB storage today, and they're certainly really keen to see this update and being able to, I guess, use more of a native approach.
We have
And all
customers.
this, sorry,
Sorry, yeah, we have customers that are 100% Azure. Their desktops are coming out of Azure via
yeah,
RDSH. And so they're excited to use this because if they can take advantage of native object-based storage, then they can save, that can save them money as compared to buying the SMB service, from Azure.
yeah,
I also want to bring up, you mentioned that you've got customers that are interested from a XenApp perspective. If the XenApp environments are the same, and meaning like the server versions are the same, the profile versions are the same, you can use Cloud Cache to pre-stage to help with that migration. You can use Cloud Cache in the on-prem XenApp implementation, configure the Azure location as the secondary location, and
yeah.
then that data is just waiting in Azure whenever the customer wants to start using Azure for their XenApp servers. And there, the registry key, the list in that registry key would be flipped so that the Azure location would be the number one location. But there's no data migration then as part of this. The data is already there waiting.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess there's other migration scenarios. It might be potentially the other way around. I'm getting my desktops from a DAS provider. Maybe I want to migrate. Hopefully, I don't want to because my DAS provider is providing me a great experience anyway. But it sort of enables me to unlock those profiles and use the data out of there more easily.
That's been one of my pet peeves since Brian and I wrote the DAS book in 2014 was
Yep.
nobody ever thinks about how do I back up this data? How do I make sure that I have access to these things after I move to DAS? And maybe they do. Nobody's spoken to me about that. And so I've carried around a soapbox, and every time I get a chance to talk about it, I set it down and climb up on it. But this gives you a chance when you there's a few different ways that you can break up with a DAS provider, right? There's some graceful ways and there's some not so graceful ways. And if one day the DAS provider doesn't answer the phone and your desktops don't work, you'd like to make sure that you had access to your profile data. And this is a way to do that by configuring your on-premises location as a secondary location. You can always make sure you have a backup.
Yeah, everything else is easily solvable. I think that profile and user data is just the last mile component, isn't it?
Yeah, for
All
sure.
right, so I think that's what do you say? Is that a fair overview of Cloud Cache? Anything else we've got there? Because I've got a couple of questions we could go through on this
Yeah,
piece, and
I think that's
I'm
fair.
gonna bring up the big heads in the cloud again.
This is like a Superman 2 kind of thing. Like you're gonna be in the mirrors, floating, tumbling.
Love it.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah. Oh, hey, that's a good one for the next one. We could. Ah, who was the actor who played his father? Was God, it's right on the
Marlon
tip of my
Brando.
tongue. Marlon Brando. That's it. We should have done like that. Maybe after we're both dead and gone, they can bring us back like they did with that 2006 Superman movie. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. All right, so
This is what happens when we talk.
a few questions here. When can I get my hands on Cloud Cache? So I don't know, maybe I'm an existing customer or maybe a new customer. So when can I start to deploy Cloud Cache?
So Cloud Cache is out now. If you download the latest version of FSLogix, if you're already an FSLogix customer, the latest version has the Cloud Cache bits in it. There are some docs on the support website that'll talk to you about how to get it going. And of course, Aaron will be able to help you out and the rest of Insentra. So the SMB, the version of Cloud Cache that supports SMB locations only is out right now. The first cloud version that we support will be Azure, and that will be soon. Nobody lets me say a date, even though I desperately want to say a date. So soon is as close as I can be. Azure will be the first cloud platform we support, and it will be
Okay.
soon.
And what's the support for AWS based on? Like I'm assuming you've gone Azure first because that's where you're seeing most demand.
Yeah. We have very close ties to Microsoft and as well, and so we were able to it was just kind of a perfect storm there. So yes, that is where the requests have come from. And we decided to kind of leverage our resources with Microsoft as well to help build this out. S3 support has not, as far as I know, we haven't started working on anything else yet. So I'm not I don't have any insider information roadmap wise to share, but I will say, we will develop the next connector based upon customer feedback. And so, if S3 or EFS is what we hear, then that'll be the path that we'll consider. So, if you have a thought one way or the other, be sure to let us know.
Yeah, and I guess as we were saying earlier, like you could always deploy on a VM, right? So even if you're an AWS customer today, there's nothing actually stopping you from deploying containers or Cloud Cache in AWS. It just happens you just need to be able to present SMB storage.
Exactly. Yep.
Yep. So yeah, I guess that was the next question actually is when will Cloud Cache support Azure and AWS? So we've talked about that. How does Cloud Cache account for storage performance and latency? So I think we've kind of covered this, right? So just by nature of implementing a local cache, and that's where your primary I/O is, reads and writes are coming from. That's sort of solves the first part of solving that storage performance challenge, and then beyond that, then you're just taking the from the cache, you're synchronizing back up to your container remote location. Does that sound right?
Yes, so so the performance benefit of this on the cloud side is actually it's easier to explain just because imagine if we had to operate out of a VHD container that lived in the cloud, say for some reason we were feeling super daring and we just decided to open up 443 or 445 all the way to the cloud and operate out of SMB over the raw internet. The performance would not be excellent all the time. And like you and I were talking about before this, bandwidth is a big deal. And so, limited bandwidth might result in a limited user experience as well. But because we have that local cache involved, maybe the first time we're accessing a block, and keep in mind, Cloud Cache works at a block level, not at a file level. So we're not copying down, say, the entire OST file. We're copying just the blocks that we need. So we may have to pull that block down one time from the cloud, the storage container in the cloud, but then every future time that's accessed, it's accessed out of the local cache. And so that results in a very good user experience, and it also results in less impact on the remote storage, which, while it's maybe a little bit more exaggerated in the cloud, also applies to on-premises file servers as well. We're reducing the load on those.
So I could go back in time to 2004 when I had that discussion with that customer who wanted to deploy Outlook cache mode on terminal server. Might have been 2000, might have been Windows 2000 or even 2003 at the time. I could say, oh, we can finally do that.
Yeah,
I bet you
so
that
that
box
was a
still
feature of
exists.
that was a feature of Office 2003 was
Yeah.
was the OST file. So yeah, so that's what, 15 years now. Holy cow.
So with that cache, then can we control how much data is cached? I guess is a sort of deep technical question. Is I got to consider how much cache is on the VM, right? So I
Right.
need to size for it. So will I have any sort of controls on how much data is cached?
Okay, so I'm the product marketing guy, right? But fortunately for you, I've asked the product management guy about this very question. We do not have a way to control the size, to limit the size of the local cache at this point in time. That's,
Yep.
something that's on the in consideration for future releases, but nothing that we have right now, and nothing I can commit to, of course. But we do have the ability, like I mentioned early on, to make that cache persistent and non-persistent. And so if you don't want your cache to grow and grow and grow, say, for example, in a PVS environment, right? XenApp on PVS, you can set that cache to be non-persistent. That way, when the user logs off, the cache is thrown away and we start rebuilding it from scratch the next time they log in. And so, while that might not be the most resource efficient way of dealing with things, it's a good compromise.
Yeah, and I guess having said that, it's kind of hard to kind of predict how much you're going to need to cache because
Mm-hmm.
every user is going to be different. The amount of data that's in their profile is potentially going to be different as well, and the amount of, say, let's say they've got OneDrive inside their profile and they're synchronizing that. Not everyone's going to have a consistent size of their one profile. Sorry, OneDrive for Business sync folder, right? So what's actually cache is going to really sort of be dependent per user. But then, as you can say, with the persistent, non-persistent cache, you just architect for storage as local to that desktop, right? And so that it can pull something from something that's close to them that's fast to be able to pull that down. So that, I guess ultimately
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of an architecture question, then really.
Yeah, it totally depends on the use case, and it's a registry setting, so we can configure that on a per user, per machine, per whatever basis.
Yeah. Um, So how is Cloud Cache better than using Microsoft DFS? And maybe I did mention DFS by name, but we kind of answered this, I think, when, I think today it's kind of fair to say that a lot of organizations use DFS, the DFS namespace, so I have consistent
That's
namespace across
exactly.
firms, but they're not necessarily using the replication piece. Um, I'm actually just came to mind. I'm working with a customer we're going to use DFS in this particular case just due to timing. We're going to use DFSR to do replication of a file server, but it's just a one-way thing, right? We're not doing multiple replication backwards and forth. We just want to get this file server migrated to another location, and then we're going to turn DFSR off. But in this particular scenario with profiles, we're kind of solving that by essentially building the replication mechanism into Cloud Cache because you can write to multiple locations.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And excuse me, and you're right. Most customers are just using DFS for the namespace, and that's it. To use it for the replication is cumbersome, and I mean, it's been a long time since I tried, but everybody seems to make the same face that I make when you bring it up. So I think nothing's changed. And yeah, so and the other thing is that any storage availability, high availability platform out there is relying on some sort of controller that's out of band from the desktop. And so, the desktop virtualization team has to work with the storage team, because usually those are two different groups. At least that's been my experience. And so you have to make sure everybody's on the same page. This can be fully administered by any UC admin. So all I need are 2 separate storage locations, and then I configure it in the registry, and Cloud Cache takes care of the rest. I don't need expensive storage. I don't need anything that's super highly available or fault tolerant or anything like that. At the hardware level, I can take care of everything with stuff I already have.
Yeah, it's almost like a scale out architecture, right? If I'm doing DFSR to do replication, I'm kind of relying on the file servers to handle all of that replication piece. So I need to size my file servers correctly, not only just for users accessing stuff, but then on top of that, replication and so on. Whereas if I got, I guess, the FSLogix agent doing the replication, I'm now scaling out all my CPU and disk and whatever across my desktops, and they can handle synchronization. I'm still gonna have to size my file servers correctly, but from a performance perspective, compute performance perspective, I'm kind of spreading that load out a bit, so I potentially have a sort of another avenue of improving that or streamlining it a bit.
Yeah,
I
you're not
think,
off the hook, but you're also in more control.
yeah.
So yeah.
So I think we're coming pretty close to the end. Just got one last question here. So this is, does Cloud Cache support disk encryption? So do you want me to answer this one? Because
Yeah,
I do a
please.
lot with Azure and stuff like that. So I think this is, I guess, disk encryption. There's kind of a couple of things that come to mind here, right? I might have on-prem server where I'm doing disk encryption, the storage layer underneath, and all we're doing really is we're putting containers or the Cloud Cache on top of that disk encryption. So that layer, it doesn't matter too much. Because I'm doing a lot of work with customers with Azure, I'm sort of seeing more and more that, and Azure even recommends that you enable disk encryption. But again, I think it's at the storage layer. So whether it's a storage account, Azure storage account, it supports disk encryption natively. And then maybe if it's a VM on top of that, you enable BitLocker inside the VM. But again, I guess it's transparent to the container that's sitting on top of that storage. So we're encrypting those containers at rest. And then in the future, we're talking about synchronizing that container across the REST API. That's going to be across TLS, right? HTTPS.
Correct.
So there'll be encryption for that data, across the wire as it's being replicated.
Yep,
so
exactly.
That answers that question. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Gabe, I want to thank you very much for staying up late. It's obviously now the morning for you. Hopefully you can have a sleep in tomorrow.
I'm a night owl, so this isn't that big of a deal. It's about 10 to 1.
10 to 1. Okay. Well, thanks very much for jumping on. I really appreciate it.
No, this is
Hopefully
great. Thank
we've
you.
given everyone a good overview of what Cloud Cache is. Cloud Cache is available today with some new features coming in the future. I guess Azure and AWS support sort of being on the roadmap for those. If you have any questions, you can, I think for attendees, you'll receive an email after the webinar. So you can reach out to us for any additional info or questions that you might need, or evaluations and so on. Otherwise, you can go to insentragroup.com/FSLogix for to look out for more information. So thanks, Ed. And for that, I want to say thanks for everyone attending, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.